Welcome everyone joining us from across North America this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're coming from. Apologies for a bit of confusion with the start time of this webinar. I hope that you all enjoy our discussion today, and we're really looking forward to beginning. My name is Christy Smith. I'm speaking to you from Denver, Colorado. I lead the Housing Affordability Breakthrough Challenge for Enterprise in close partnership with Wells Fargo. On behalf of both organizations, we thank you for joining today's dialogue as we highlight preservation of affordable housing's winning innovation, designing trauma-resilient communities. POAH and their implementation partners will engage in powerful dialogue that will prioritize the importance of equity, creativity, and resilience as we reimagine affordable housing service delivery, management, and space design. The Housing Affordability Breakthrough Challenge was created to identify and accelerate ideas that could transform how affordable homes are built, financed, and provide a gateway to stability and success, all while advancing racial equity and environmental sustainability. We created this 6-part webinar series to not only highlight each of the 6 challenge winners, but also create space for leading voices and a diversity of perspectives on a variety of issues that can underscore how innovation is imperative to developing new and creating housing affordability solutions through financing, construction, and resident services and support. This is the 4th webinar in our series. You can watch the other webinars that have already taken place earlier this year by going to housingbreakthrough.org. Those webinars include topics such as justice housing, equitable underwriting systems, and housing an affordable homeownership in rural and tribal communities. You can also register for our final 2 webinars coming up in the next 2 months. Be sure to subscribe to learn about the progress of all 6 of our winning breakthrough ideas, and stay informed about future events at housingbreakthrough.org as well. Before I introduce our moderator, I'll ask Connie Wright, Senior Vice President and Housing Affordability Philanthropy with Wells Fargo, to join me in welcoming our audience and panel participants. Connie not only has had a leading role in developing the Housing Affordability Breakthrough Challenge, but remains highly engaged with this initiative to support innovative new solutions in the affordable housing sector. Connie.
Christy, thank you for that welcoming. And I would like to take the time to welcome all of you on the webinar today. One thing that Christy did not mention was the important engagement in the housing affordability space, particularly around transformation and innovation. Each and every webinar continues to gain momentum. And today we have over 800 individuals that are registered to attend the webinar today. And so that really is validation that the Affordable Housing Affordability Breakthrough Challenge has been successful in engaging those of you key stakeholders, thought leaders in the innovative and housing affordability ecosystem. And so we are thrilled to be partnering and collaborating with POAH today. The work that they will talk about will really touch upon key areas of focus for Wells Fargo, as well as enterprise. When we think about health and housing, that intersection there will be dialogue in that respect. And then also around equity, we continue to focus, as are many organizations and individuals, all hands on deck to ensure that we address really that important component in the housing affordability space today. And so with that, would like to again, thank you all for joining. And we are very hopeful that you will find the panel as engaging as we have, and looking forward to you continuing to be engaged with us as we move forward through our next couple of webinars. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Christy.
Thanks so much, Connie. If you've not already done so, please let us know where you're joining us from and why this topic is of interest to you in the chat feature of Zoom. Following our panel discussion, we will leave time for Q&A, and we encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom. We'll get to as many questions as we possibly can in the last 15 minutes or so of our time together today. And if you're engaged in this conversation through social media, please use the hashtag #HousingBreakthrough in your posts. So let's get started. I'll turn it over to today's moderator, Caitlin Beal, Senior Social Innovation Specialist with Design Impact. Caitlin, thanks for moderating today's discussion, and I'll ask that you introduce yourself as well as our esteemed panelists. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Christy. And thank you all so much for being here today, virtually, of course, in this space. So my name is Caitlin Beal. I am with a nonprofit organization called Design Impact. So we are based in Cincinnati, Ohio. You can tell by the humidity in my hair. It is summer here in Cincinnati, but we actually work all over the country, and we help organizations tackle complex social issues. So a big part of our role is helping organizations move through a process to solve a problem differently by thinking more creatively and sharing power with the people closest to the issues. I am also your friendly neighborhood moderator for today, and I am so excited to introduce you to our amazing, incredible panelists. So I'm just gonna go down the line and go ahead and introduce you to our amazing panelists for today. So first up, we have Alejandra Cervantes, who is a design researcher with Mass Design Group. So her background is in architectural practice, and she joined the Boston office of Mass Design Group in 2019. As a design researcher, she focuses on design inclusion and developing new methods for design processes to respond to social issues in the built environment and architectural practice. Her design research includes practices that are trauma-informed, and we are so excited to have her on today's panel. Okay, next up we have Juliana Stewart. Juliana is Vice President of Community Impact for Preservation of Affordable Housing, or what we like to refer to as POAH. Juliana holds so many roles. She focuses on POAH's national initiatives, including strategic partnerships, fundraising, best practice development, and scaling across POAH's portfolio. She also manages POAH's Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which enables HUD-assisted families to build assets, increase their earned income, and achieve personal and financial goals. So basically, she does all the things. She brings a bird's eye view to help POAH promote well-being and equity through trauma-resilient design across POAH's national portfolio. So thank you for being here today, Juliana. Okay, next up, Daphne Thomas, my girl in Cincinnati. Hello, Cincinnati. Daphne is the Community Impact Manager for POAH Community's Cincinnati portfolio. She leads the Community Impact team, and she builds strategic partnerships with local agencies that holistically serve POAH families. Her experience as an entrepreneur helped launch Cincinnati's community department here in Cincinnati. And their goal is to build safety nets for families when they need it and springboards for when they're ready to reach their goals. So welcome, Daphne. Thanks so much for being here. Okay, finally, last but not least, Krisha Williams. Krisha is a special projects coordinator with the Center for Trauma-Informed Innovation. So she leads strategic learning, community education, and organizational development initiatives centered in trauma-informed care and resilience. She has been with the Truman Medical Center's behavioral health for more than 21 years and brings a background in mental health, substance use education, and Christian counseling, not only to her work, but also to today's panel. So thank you for being here, Krisha. Whew, what an amazing panel. Are you so excited? I am so excited for all of the amazing knowledge that everybody is about to drop. So, okay, also I'm trying to keep the energy up because it's 1:40 here in Cincinnati. So it's kind of that sleepy time right after lunch. So I'm gonna keep the energy up. But first, let me just tell you about why we're here today. What the heck are we gonna be talking about? So I wanna just set some stage for you. We are here to talk about trauma, but also resilience and the role that it plays in affordable housing and why it should matter to you. But first, okay, what do we mean by trauma? Why are we talking about it? So first thing you should know, trauma can be a lot of different things. It can be adversity from childhood or a major incident, or even the intense stress of the pandemic. It can also impact everyone, okay? It can affect you, it can affect me, it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't just affect one community or one type of person or a particular income level or race. So there is an estimated 70% of adults in the US who have experienced some type of traumatic event. So it's prevalent, that's the first thing you should know. Second thing you should know, so when life hits us with traumatic experiences, we are more likely to bounce back or be resilient when we have healthy ways to cope and have a supportive environment. So part of that supportive environment is our homes, right? It's the quality of our homes and our community. And those conditions can either reinforce past harm or it can help to heal. So today, our panel is going to be talking about how affordable housing can help to heal in 3 different areas. We're going to be talking about how trauma-informed care can really show up in physical space, resident services, and property management. And also how you and your organization can be part of this work. Okay? All right, so let's get into it. So we are not just going to tell you about what we're learning, but also we are going to practice some of that with you. So we are going to invite you in. So in case you don't know, all of us are actually on a project together where we are going to be reimagining what affordable housing looks like. Again, in those 3 areas of physical space, resident services, and property management, when we can be more compassionate together. So we are all on this project together. So we often have a lot of Zoom meetings. We're always coming from different meetings, you know, our heads are all over the place. So we like to actually start every meeting with a centering exercise. So we are actually going to do that together today. So since we can't see your faces, you can do whatever you want here. I promise it's not going to be too woo-woo, but we like to center because it kind of just helps get your brain and your body all in the same spot, right? Deep breathing in particular can help calm your nervous system. You know, it can slow you down and it can help you get back into your body when your brain is feeling all over the place. So it's just a nice thing to do when you're coming into a meeting, but then also, you know, it's good when you're in maybe like a panic mode too. So we're all going to do it together. We're just going to do a very quick exercise. I'm going to ask our panelists to also be joining us. So they're going to keep their screens on, but again, you just practice this at home or wherever you are. So we are going to do an exercise we like to call 3 by 3. So we are going to breathe in for a count of 3, and then we are going to hold for 3. You're going to breathe out for a count of 3, and then we'll do that a total of 3 times. So I am going to lead you through the first 2 breaths, and then you can do the last one on your own. Okay? All right. So first, if you are in your seat, go ahead and get settled, get seated. And we are going to, you can either close your eyes or you can kind of softly look off into the distance. All right. So take a deep breath in and go ahead and just dump all of that air out, however you want to. Okay. So let's take a deep breath in for a count of 3, 2, and 3, hold, 2, 3, breathe out, 2, 3. Do one more, breathe in, 2, 3, hold, 2, 3, breathe out, 2, 3. You can do that last one at your own pace. Okay. When you are feeling ready, you can come on back. It's great to see everybody's faces, at least on the panel. I'm sure your all faces look great too. Okay, so hopefully that is leaving you a little bit more grounded, a little bit more centered. And so we are going to go ahead and get started. So let's just go ahead and set the stage for everybody. Panelists, what does trauma-informed care mean to you? So, Krisha, I'd like to hand it off to you first.
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. So trauma-informed care is nothing more than that compassionate service delivery that can be done at any time by anyone at any place. Like, you don't have to be a clinician, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to have a certain title. Trauma-informed care is that compassionate service delivery that positions us to treat people with respect, right? Without judgment, that deep compassion.
Awesome. Thank you, Krisha. And Alejandra, what about you?
Thanks, Caitlin. For me, trauma-informed care is really heavy on the care part of that concept. It's about caring deeply, and I've learned that it looks very different in many settings, but one way that I've grown to kind of attach to more on the definition is by how it has an increased awareness on somebody's experiences, their emotions, their behaviors, and including one's own in space.
And Juliana, what about you? What does trauma-informed care mean to you?
Yeah, I love how Alejandra talked about sort of that appreciation for someone's experiences. To me, being trauma-informed is about seeing the whole person. And so when we kind of zoom out and look at the whole person, we have to recognize how the experiences that we've had show up in us today and sort of how we encounter situations today. And I think we also have to look at the bigger systems that we're all moving in as whole people, whether that's the housing system, a healthcare system, or systems of power and privilege that influence kind of the opportunity we have or kind of a position we find ourselves in any given moment. And so when I think about this trauma-informed lens, not just a care model, but also that broader lens. And so I think that we really have a unique opportunity to reimagine affordable housing through this lens and imagine it in a way that puts the person at the center of our system, the person and their well-being at the very center.
I love that. Keeping people at the center. And Daphne, anything you want to add that hasn't been said?
Sure. I think it's really just about being mindful and intentional in our everyday interactions with other humans, you know, who may have or who may be currently experiencing undesirable events that can help alter and challenge their being. So definitely about seeing and recognizing the whole person.
Yes, I love what everyone's been saying about seeing the whole person, seeing what, or knowing or not knowing what has been happening in the past, just recognizing that affects how you show up. I think that's perfect. I'm curious, so follow-up question, how does trauma-informed care show up in all of your work? So Krisha, I will kick it back to you. What does it look like in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin, again. Trauma-informed care in our job, in our organization, Truman Medical Centers in Kansas City, Missouri, is infused in everything that we do. Like, we strive to infuse it in everything that we do. So Missouri was one of many states that was a part of this huge learning collaborative for trauma-informed care. And as a result of that, the Center for Trauma-Informed Innovation was birthed. And that created a lot of opportunities for this particular program within our organization to reach out to internal and external providers to help them view what they do through a trauma-informed lens. So we connected with the Mid-America Addiction Technology Transfer Centers, and what that has done, that has allowed us to become trauma-informed care implementation specialists. Big fancy word, right? And so simply what that means is we have the opportunity not to just help individuals in departments and programs within our organization, but we reach out into the community and we work with external providers to help them view what they do through that trauma-informed lens, right? Whether it's changing policy, whether it's helping staff to get over a difficult hurdle that may have occurred in their organization, or helping the staff to reach out to their clients more. And so we infuse that trauma-informed care lens through our own policies and procedures. We teach trauma-informed care at every orientation for new hires. And we also support our peers in our organization to have that autonomy to create peer support groups as well. And then lastly, we infuse trauma-informed care by we created a trauma-informed care committee, if you will. We call it the Trauma Awareness and Resilience Steering Committee. And it's a committee with caseworkers and therapists and nurses, all different disciplines, all different roles have joined this committee. And what we do, we go to different departments and different programs to help them either shape or reshape, or maybe even look at signage or language or verbiage to help that particular department or program become more trauma informed. And so it's not just one person, it's a collective effort that we try to infuse throughout the organization on a daily basis. Awesome. So Krisha, you're almost like a trauma informed, like, super coach. Yeah. Yeah, but anybody can be, and I know that we'll talk about this later, but yeah, anybody can be trauma informed. It's not narrowed down to a particular person or role or expertise. Anybody can do this. That's the fascinating thing about trauma informed care, because we all have that ability to be compassionate. Awesome. Well, and I hope that we get to pick up some tips today as well. So I'm going to kick it off to Alejandra. What does it look like at Mass? What does trauma-informed care look like at Mass?
Thanks, Caitlin. So at Mass Design Group, the organization I'm part of, we're a nonprofit architecture firm, and we've come to learn that about trauma-informed design across many projects we get to work on. So hospitals, whether that's affordable housing or memorials. And our practice was really built on the foundation that design matters and that the built environment has a deep impact in people's lives. And as part of our broader mission, we believe that design is never neutral. It either can hurt or heal. And our core question we always tend to ask in our projects and from our partners is, how can the built environment shape behavior and move towards healing, from everything from an individual level to a community scale? And using trauma-informed care and its principles and its lessons as a leading framework, we've also learned ways that space has the power to shape and influence our behavior, but it also plays a role in supporting individuals that are healing from traumatic experiences. And we've also found that trauma-informed design can be just much more than tactical interventions, which are very important, but it also provides us with an opportunity to address the systems in place, which Juliana was mentioning earlier, that those systems that continue to perpetuate trauma in the first place, this is a really great opportunity to address those at a higher level.
Great. And I know we'll be digging into some more, like, some physical examples of what that looks like, what trauma-informed design looks like. Okay, to talk about trauma-informed care in affordable housing, I am now going to kick it off to Juliana and Daphne from POAH. So this next question is for you, Juliana, if you could start. Why is it important to think about trauma-informed care and trauma in affordable housing?
Yeah, such an important question, Caitlin. And I am just really grateful to be here with Daphne on behalf of the challenge to explore this with this amazing panel we have here, and all the amazing folks who have joined us. So just a little bit about POAH. We are a nonprofit owner and operator of affordable rental housing. We are in 12 states and DC, and more than 12,000 families call our communities home. So when you think about the work that we're doing together and exploring, I think hitting on this piece about, looking at the system, looking at the bigger picture, we can have a really tremendous impact on those 12,000 families. And we strongly believe that safe, decent, affordable housing can foster resilience and can support overall well-being. That's part of the reason we're here. I think there's enormous potential. But our industry, the affordable housing industry, has really, in trying to meet the growing need for affordable housing, we have been laser focused on increasing the supply of units and protecting the affordability of the units that we have now. And that is essential. It's so important. Mm-hmm. But we feel like, that focus is really driven in a lot of ways by very tight margins, pretty heavy regulation. And that tends to lead with kind of this compliance perspective and managing risk, right? So if we're leading with those goals and leading through those perspectives, then a lot of our approach to this work is coming from that sort of managing risk, managing towards compliance. Again, really important. That is essential to the work we do. It allows us to do our mission, but we feel like that's taken an outsized role in our industry, and that as a result, we may actually be creating more barriers. We may actually be creating more adversity for the folks that we're trying to serve. And so we actually may be kind of even getting in the way of that mission to foster resilience and support well-being when we kind of lead with that risk management compliance lens. Yeah. So we have a lot of examples, but Daphne, you are like on the ground and, doing this work every day. Like, how is this showing up for you?
Yeah, so you talked about those heavy, regulations that we have to have in order to have a POAH and to make sure that our affordable housing, those have to be in place, and we understand why those rules are in place. But I think with this work that we're doing, we're focusing on how we can make it a win-win situation for everybody involved, and to start to design some of the rules and regulations around actual human beings and human life. And how we can make it more of a win-win situation. You said the regulation and I tensed up immediately.
Right.
Like that tone sets, places it in stone that like the rules are already made, and it can make people feel like they're already wrong. It always makes me think about, going through the airport. I'm always tense and anxious, wondering, did I leave my bomb at home or is it in my bag? Like, I'm going through security, and God forbid you pack the wrong size shampoo, and then people are going through your stuff. You're being pulled out of line. And, although that's something so small, it makes it feel like it's something so major. And, we understand that that's in place to keep everybody safe. But it also can create trauma for people who are just simply traveling. And that translates into, back to what you were talking about, those heavy regulations and how it affect the residents. And then they come in and then, a situation may occur and now everybody, including staff, is traumatized. So things like, going through this process, we can reconsider, like, how do we even deliver undesirable information? Is that me waiting until Friday to give it to somebody and then they go home with it and then they're sitting with that all weekend and they're, in a state to where they can't call anybody because it's the weekend and we're at home, but they're sitting at home wondering what's going to be their fate inevitably. So I truly believe that, most residents, want to do the right thing, they're working hard, and they need us to see that.
Yeah. And you and I talk about this a lot, that it can show up in smaller ways and in bigger ways. So those smaller ways, like if you ever look at the historical house rules for most affordable housing providers, you can learn all the things you're not supposed to do, right? So no burning candles, no grilling in the common areas, no painting your apartment. They all have to be the same, no pets. Talk about a year when a lot of people needed the comfort of a pet, right? So these are all things that, like, in small ways, like these are things that help us connect with our neighbors, decompress, manage stress. And we're taking those things away in some sense when we create these lists of things that you can't do. And like you said, it's like, it creates this feeling like I'm already in the wrong, right? I've already sort of done something wrong. And I think those are smaller things that we don't maybe realize in affordable housing. We're sort of taking that power away. But there are also a lot bigger things that can show up that can actually either create adversity or be triggering for someone. And one that we talk about all the time is the lease renewal process or recertifications. And I know anyone on the webinar who's with an affordable housing provider is deeply familiar with this, but for those of us who aren't, this is a process that you have to go through to re-qualify for assistance. And it's designed to make sure that this very scarce resource is distributed fairly. But what ends up happening is that our residents have to turn over all of this information about themselves and about their story. And it's very invasive and it can be really overwhelming. And, you know, one of our staff says it's like going to the doctor, but at least at the doctor, they give you a gown, like you're just fully exposed. And so that experience has all sorts of, you know, steps that are really uncomfortable. But I think the other thing that we've all learned about the brain science of trauma is that it can impact your attention and your memory and your problem solving. And these are all skills that you need to have to absorb all the information that lease holds, right? So that lease dictates your entire experience. And if you don't realize you're supposed to be doing something that the lease says you can't, that can really throw your housing into a precarious situation. So there's the places where we maybe create more triggering experiences. And then there's the reality that we're throwing a lot of information at folks who may be overwhelmed by that. It is a lot at once, and it can have other consequences down the road.
Mm-hmm. First of all, I just have to say the analogies are fire today. I really appreciated, Daphne, your comparison to, you know, going through the TSA line, I think is so apt. And then Juliana, I think talking about all of the different documents that you have to share when you're going through the recertification process is like going to the doctor, but without a gown, I think is spot on. So I guess just to build on all of this, then I guess, can we talk a little bit about what this project is? So why are we doing this project that all of us are on together? What is our response to all of this?
Is that me? So yeah, so I think we are, you know, engaging in this human-centered design process with this cross-cutting group of partners and asking how we can reduce the adversity and promote resiliency for residents and staff. So many great organizations are already doing the work in this space, and we want to connect with them, learn with them, and advocate with them. We saw so much work that tends to sit in the resident services or focus more narrowly on specific types of affordable housing, like the, you know, PSH. When we were doing research on this topic, we found that a lot of resources on how to integrate these approaches in education, healthcare, and had great outcomes. This matters to our mission. Our communities are already resilient, and our staff is already practicing trauma-informed care just in their day-to-day, you know, interactions with our residents. We're already delivering compassionate services, even if we don't call it that right out front. The barriers make it difficult, and many approaches place emphasis on the individual's behavior, but larger systems in which we operate have to play a role as well. You know, how do we begin to design more compassionate housing systems is the question that we are working on.
Yeah, so our organization is really excited to be partnering with Design Impact and MASS and TMC, and with the very generous, critical support of the Housing Affordability Breakthrough Challenge, we have this unique opportunity to take the next 2 years to really dive deep in this. And like Daphne said, looking at the bigger picture. So not just looking at how we can be more trauma-informed in the delivery of resident services, but the entire design of our work. So services, how we manage our properties, collecting the rent, shoveling the snow, paying the bills, like everything that goes into keeping our communities running, and the built environment, the physical space, like Alejandra talked about. It can hurt or it can heal. How are we ensuring that the physical spaces that we own, we design, we build are leaning on heal, right? And so our project is focused on 4 very diverse locations across the US. So different size properties, different configurations of staffing and levels of resources, very diverse resident populations. And we're leaning into this human-centered design process because we want to authentically engage with our staff and residents from the beginning. So not just get feedback, not just come up with our great ideas and then see what works, but really as a team, really immerse ourselves in where this is showing up now, where we might be getting it wrong, where we might naturally be getting it right, build on what works and address and try to change what doesn't together. So that's both with staff and residents and with our amazing partners.
I love that, Juliana. I love that, you know, with this work, we are not just thinking about the communities that POAH serves, you know, the actual residents, because as Krisha mentioned, we all can experience trauma and we can all be empowered to address trauma in a more compassionate way. I think by inviting staff to be part of this project as well as residents, you're also acknowledging that staff also have trauma. So I just really appreciate that. I know we've been talking a lot about, you know, trauma-informed space, you know, what design can do when it hurts. But I feel like that still feels very theoretical to me. It's still kind of like out in the atmosphere. So Alejandra, I'm going to kick it off to you because I'm curious, what do we mean by, you know, trauma in the built environment? What does that actually mean? Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Sure, happy to. I think Juliana and Daphne already covered a lot about some of the constraints around affordable housing and regulations and procedures. And we see that in the design aspect of affordable housing as well. So it's also very constrained. There's limiting funding mechanisms available. There are different federal and state guidelines we need to comply with, and the city approval processes are many. So this creates a really challenging landscape for designers that are looking to build affordable housing that include all kinds of stakeholders in the process, but then they often are void of true and meaningful engagement with the future end user, which is the residents and staff. So that's who we want to learn more about when we're creating spaces that are ultimately going to be occupied by residents or staff 100% of the time. So as Juliana was mentioning earlier, the goal for a lot of the affordable housing today is to create a number or hit a number or quantity of units. But then how are we actually hitting on the quality of the lives in these spaces that includes also the staff spaces, right? So that means that a lot of the spaces in affordable housing are simply not designed to address like specific needs of communities and the context in which the project sits. So that kind of lack of attention or purpose or care in the built environment can lead to reinforcing or perpetuating further stigma or perceptions of worth or even more trauma. So on the other hand, we have this project, right? And as Juliana was saying, like how can we have a space that is safe, thoughtful, affordable, that we can call home, that can foster resilience and just support overall well-being? So that's also the main question that we ask at MAS about how the built environment supports this vision. And just to give you like a concrete example of what I mean, like how spaces can affect or have an effect on people, I want to throw one out there for you all is, and on one end of the spectrum, we can have small scale interventions in space that can lead to a huge impact. And in one project we did recently, we worked with Newport Mental Health, who is an organization that provides trauma-informed services to children, adolescents, families, and adults who are experiencing problems with mental illness or substance abuse or stress. So we work with them to look at their clinic and their treatment facility because it was presenting them with a few issues in their waiting areas. And specifically, you know, when patients or visitors came into their space and were kind of into this waiting area, they noticed that the orientation of where people were sitting in the waiting room, where it was facing the door. So people were watching other people come into their appointments. It was kind of bridging some kind of privacy issue there. The receptionist in the waiting area was behind this bulletproof glass. So it was making patients feel as though they weren't trusted, or even worse, like they felt it was a dangerous place to be in. So that kind of perception, right? Just kind of talks, just without saying anything, you're in the space, you're noticing these things, you were already not feeling welcome. And then something else that was missing there is that the space had no like real area for families to be in. So if you had kids or families with children, how could you wait in your ward for your appointment without disturbing others, or just becoming, encroaching on other people's space while waiting? So this often led to patients, waiting outside or just being away from the facility until it was their time. So we looked at how just to make simple changes to reconfigure their space, their waiting areas, to just make a huge impact for how people might be perceiving the organization as they walked in. Like, it's very important to make that difference. And when we look at that kind of small scale intervention at one end of the spectrum, if we look at it at the other side of things, where we can make a project that is purpose built to be designed for healing, it could have deeper ramifications for impact. So a project that will soon begin construction, just to like wrap up my examples here, we're working with Haven, which is a domestic violence organization based in Bozeman, Montana, and they've been in Bozeman for over 40 years. But this project was deeply rooted in creating a space that was trauma informed, that abided by all the principles. And in doing so, it kind of removed all of the barriers and preconceptions we had about the built environment, how spaces should be designed. And we kind of embedded this idea of like implementing a trauma informed design process, so that we started to avoid designs that hurt in the first place. So that's kind of a couple of examples that kind of show you kind of at the ends of the spectrum, you can make many small changes that it's a huge impact, or you can have one purpose like built project that significantly changes everything or conceptions that you had about space.
Thank you. That is super helpful. I think those examples are really powerful.
Yeah, and sorry, I was just going to say, we've already started with this project, but we can come back to that and kind of, I can give you like another example of what we're doing now with this project, which I think is also super exciting, and we're going to get to do more in the next 2 years with these learnings.
Great. Well, so I think what's interesting about this project is not just the fact that we are, one, that we're just disrupting affordable housing in general, that we're reimagining things, but also, we are doing things differently. And Juliana, I'm just curious, like, why did you decide to do this differently?
Yeah, well, to my friendly neighborhood moderator, honestly, we learned a lot from working with you all and working with DI, and we had a really powerful experience on a smaller scale of designing our services through this human-centered design lens, which I'm putting in quotes because it feels like one of those hot terms we throw around, but there's a lot of different ways you could describe it. I think it's really about engaging from the beginning and being authentic about how you engage whomever your end user is, like Alejandra talked about, right? So we had this experience with DI. And so when we were thinking about, what would it take to reimagine affordable housing through this trauma-informed lens, we knew that we needed a new way of even going about that, right? Like, we couldn't apply our sort of traditional methods where we sort of like work out this whole idea and we use a lot of spreadsheets and we do a lot of research and then we push it out and then we get some feedback and hope maybe that it works. We wanted to do a process that also embraced the values of the outcome. So we wanted the process to also be trauma informed. So I want to kick it back to our moderator. So Caitlin, how would you talk about this human-centered design process that DI leads and how you all think about leading this work?
Okay, flipping the tables on me. I see you. All right. Well, okay. So just to talk a little about human-centered design, because you're right, it can feel like a buzzword sometimes. So also as a just as a caveat, I am not a designer, like a capital D designer. I did not go to design school. My stick figures are mediocre at best. But we think about design like a problem-solving process, right? So human-centered design is really, again, it's a process for solving problems that focuses on the needs, wants, and behaviors of the customer or the community or the person that is most impacted. So designers, capital D designers, use this process most often when they're designing a product or a service. So you imagine, someone designing, I don't know, an experience going into a shopping mall. They are thinking about, who is that person that is using the shopping mall, and what did they do before they got to the shopping mall? What are they going to do while they're there? What are they going to do afterward? So they are very much thinking about the consumer or the customer. Unfortunately, we do not see that same approach taken a lot of times in social services or like nonprofit spaces, right? The people who are designing those programs have the best intentions, but a lot of times their experiences are very far removed from the experiences of the people that they're serving. So, human-centered design, again, it's kind of like the scientific method. We're using a process that is learning about the problem or the issue from all sorts of different perspectives. And then you brainstorm ideas, and then you test some of those, and you test them very quickly. What's different about how Design Impact does human-centered design and how we're using this process is, so we're not just like thinking about the experiences of staff and residents. We're not just imagining what their experiences could be like. We're actually inviting them to be on the team, to be designing with us. So already in itself, that makes the process really different. It can make the process a little bit slower. It's not necessarily like let's all come up with the solution and then we're done. I think that if you're new to this process, you might hate it at first because it can feel like you're spending so much time on the problem. You're like, how are we still talking about the problem? We get it. But it's really important to be thinking about the problem, really steeping in it so that you know you're actually addressing the right problem and that you're asking the right questions. And so it's also really important that the people who are most affected are on the team with us to make sure that we're asking the right questions. Because if we are asking the right questions, we are going to get to, the right solutions or the right responses. So I would say that is maybe the process in a nutshell, and how this process is a little bit different than your typical design process or your typical, I don't know, innovation process. But I feel like, because I don't like to be in the hot seat very often, I'm gonna kick it back to somebody else. Daphne, you and I have also worked together on other projects where we worked alongside residents. And so I would love to hear from you. Why is it important to get resident feedback, and why is it important to do more than, the typical survey?
Yeah. I brought my pen to this. I've been taking notes because y'all like you said, Caitlin, been dropping some fire. I love what you said about needs, wants, and behaviors. Like that's complex, right? Like that's dealing with human psychology, human life. And like I said, those are complex things. And a lot of times we try to capture complex information with surveys. And that's not always the best way to gauge human wants, needs, and behaviors. So like you just talked about, Caitlin, we worked together with the research project that we had a couple of years ago, and we got to engage our community Mavins, which are residents who are experts in the lived POAH experience. And they got to sit with us during our questioning, during our brainstorming sessions. They got to contribute and participate. And, share feelings about, the problem that we were working to solve. And I thought that was wonderful because we got to see it from, again, their lived experience, like something that's happening to them in real time, and being able to contribute from that level is something that you really can't replace. I think it also provides a sense of ownership and control around, what's happening in their lives and around their lives, especially during times where the community might be changing around them. It gives them a sense of, and this is what I've heard from them, that, that they have some say, that they're being heard. And then when we're able to take action based off of the things that they've shared, I think that really pushes us all in the right direction. And then who better to listen to than the people who are actually being impacted by the things that are going on. To me, even the word feedback, it was kind of cringy the other day as I was saying it, like, oh, wait a minute, what's coming through? It's like you're giving somebody something that's already established, and then they're just supposed to put something back out based off of what was given to them, and not really having room to just like stop and think about, like, what are my thoughts? What are my actual feelings around what's being done, what's being said, in my life, in my neighborhood, and in the building or property in which I live. I think that this is just a good paradigm shift where the residents actually have the say. And I think them injecting that is like changing the DNA of like what we're creating together. So to me, that's why I think it's important to include the people who are being impacted the most by the processes like we're working through with this project.
And Krisha, I know we have not forgotten about you. I am just so curious, like what are some ways that staff and residents, in our project are already demonstrating resilience and trauma-informed care? I know we talk so often about how everyone can practice it. So where are you seeing people already practicing it? And do people, trauma-informed, even the phrase trauma-informed care can feel a little clinical. Is that how other people describe it?
So 2 very good questions. First of all, I didn't think you forgot about me. I was taking it all in, soaking it all in. I would like to address the language first. So it depends on the community in which you are in, right? And so the community that we serve, we use the term trauma-informed care. Let me put a pin there and just say that we're not married to that term, because that term can be overused. And over the past year, I'm pretty sure it has been. And so the last thing that we want to do is create or hear this term or say this term, and then it loses its context so much so that it's become superficial, right? And it becomes like, oh, woo-woo, here we go, trauma-informed care, right? Trauma-informed care is the technical term that we choose to use. When we go into the communities that we're serving, we speak their language. And I think that is very important to know, and very important to state that when we are able to speak the language of the community, then they can get a better idea, a better understanding of the concept of what we're trying to teach. And then they themselves can accept it and then go and teach somebody else. So if it's not trauma-informed care, that term, then that's okay. It may be person-centered care for them. It may be human-informed care for them, or human-centered care, or whatever the term may be. It just may be, oh, you're talking about treating people with respect. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what we'll call it, right? And so we just don't want to put it out there that you have to be hung up on that clinical term, trauma-informed care, because once we're hung up on that clinical term, then we shift from something that it's like something that we have to do, a checklist. We have to treat people with respect. We have to have that compassionate care. We have to be aware of what everybody's feeling. And that becomes a checklist. It can very easily become a checklist. So we want to get away from that, speak the language of the community, and then trauma-informed care becomes something that we do, right? It becomes trauma-informed caring, right? Something that we do. So that's a part of the language that I wanted to address. And then ways that I see that staff and residents are demonstrating this practice already. I see that residents are more willing to let their multidisciplinary team come into their lives. And what I mean by that, you may have a resident, or we may be working with a resident that has a caseworker or a therapist or a nurse or a psychiatrist. And then the resident is willing to sign a release to bring those entities or bring those different people involved in their care onto one page, right? And so now we have what's affecting the individual in the home. Now we've pulled in the therapist, and now we've pulled in the nurse. They have a greater understanding of a holistic approach, right? Daphne and Alejandra and Juliana already talked about treating the whole person. When we're able to activate that multidisciplinary team, then we are able to see a better view of the whole person, take the appropriate steps to help that individual, right? However that may look and whatever that may be. So the multidisciplinary team is one of many things that I'm seeing that the residents are doing and the staff are doing. I'm also seeing signage, and that is like safe space, safe place, quiet space in different places where we may be dealing with an individual or a family that may have an autistic child that may need a quieter space. And so there's a separation, 2 different waiting rooms or 2 different areas that's labeled, right? You can definitely be supported in this back area, or be supported in this front area, and those individuals are communicated with separately, privately, so it's not like everybody can hear, right? And so they have a choice. So we support their choice. There's signage even on the bathrooms, right? And so the bathrooms are not specific to gender, right? And so that is inclusive of everyone. One may feel inclusive in that as well. We also have, I mentioned this earlier, but the autonomy of peers supporting each other by establishing their own group. Daphne mentioned no one, when you go through something and you meet someone who's been through something similar, that's a great bond. That's a strong bond already created or connected without you even knowing that individual, because you have something in common. So when we give our residents and our peers the autonomy to establish something specifically for them that they can understand on their level, that supports them, that empowers them, and then that gives them their voice back, right? And so then we also have peers and residents on what we call a resident council, right? And so that gives the residents an opportunity to voice what they're feeling or express what they're feeling or the changes that they want to see made to a larger group, right? And how empowering is that for me to take my little humble concern to a larger group and they hear me and changes are made, right? And so we're seeing that and we're welcoming that throughout, not only with this project, but in different organizations that we work with, in our very own organizations. And then, of course, last but not least, policies and procedures. We're seeing trauma-informed care infused in policies and procedures. And let me put a pin here, because I want to say that when a policy and procedure or standing operating procedures, whatever you may want to call them, when that requires change, usually the intent is not, oh, this is not trauma-informed. Usually that is a result of something happening that requires something to be changed, right? And so as we are more compassionate, or as we learn more about what trauma-informed care means to our community or our organization or even ourselves, as we learn what that means, then we are able to change whatever policy or procedure that needs to be changed to fit the need of the organization or the need of the resident. But because we have a good understanding of the concept of trauma-informed care, that will be woven in organically. So we will be more mindful of the language that we use. We will be more mindful and more equitable and more fair of what our policies will state because of that self-awareness, right? That awareness of of what someone may have encountered or what someone may have experienced. And so we take all of that, and I've seen it done, and I've heard it done with POAH, and I've seen it done in our organization, but they take all of that and practice trauma-informed care and not even know it. It becomes natural. It's an intentional practice that we have to do that then eventually becomes a part of who we are. So.
Caitlin, I'd love to build on something that Krisha shared about this kind of like a concept of a multidisciplinary team and the ways we can learn from all of the great work that the clinical setting has done around trauma-informed care and sort of adapt that to our model. So we have another amazing partner on this project, but apparently there's only so many squares on the Zoom, so we didn't bring everybody today, but that's an organization called Community Services League out of Independence, Missouri. And we've been learning about trauma-informed care alongside them for many years. And so in their site team, we talked about assembling residents and staff, they've also brought in other community partners. And, you know, we're working with the schools, we're working with the faith community, working with law enforcement and thinking about, you know, what does it mean to have different sectors of a community coming together on this issue? And, you know, if I'm practicing trauma-informed care in a school and then I send you home to a community that's going to be really triggering, you know, we are missing out on a major opportunity to build community-wide resilience. So this idea of different stakeholders coming together, I think it shows up in different community stakeholders coming together. And it's also the reason that our project is not just about resident services, but about also how we manage and also how we design, because we think it's all those things together that are going to really have an impact on our culture and on how we operate and ultimately on our mission.
I love that. And I think in general, you know, something that I'm taking away from this conversation is it is so clear that when we talk about housing, we're not just talking about a roof over our heads. You know, we are talking about this much more holistic community and our mental health and our physical health and what we have access to. So I appreciate just all of the different perspectives you all have added and shared today. All right, so it sounds like things are going pretty well. You know, Krisha has shared multiple examples of trauma-informed care or human-centered care or compassionate care in a lot of different spaces. So why do we need to normalize these trauma-resilient approaches? Why is it important to incorporate trauma-resilient or trauma-informed approaches into our affordable housing? And Alejandra, I'll start with you, since physical environment, I feel like is a good concrete place to start.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Caitlin. I think what makes what we are learning about trauma-informed design so special is that this approach, like having a trauma-informed care approach, doesn't just benefit everybody who's experienced or gone through trauma. And we learned that trauma is pervasive. So everybody you might encounter or interact with might have gone through a traumatic experience, but the lessons that we've come to learn about how design can influence behavior and some interventions that we can come from or come with will benefit everybody who's involved. So we need to see if this approach can transform. We will change the design of all of our spaces. So embedding all of the principles about safety, empowerment, choice, collaboration, and trust, which are kind of the core tenets of trauma-informed care, and also empower individuals and communities to kind of own that process and steward how they design our homes, our schools, our neighborhoods. So what you're just mentioning, Juliana, bringing on all of the parties or stakeholders involved is about addressing the whole person, or it's about, you know, getting back to what is that person, you know, what services they're using, what places they're going to, and kind of seeing the whole picture all at once. So I think that's one way that we can start to see how this is part of our everyday and like normalizing it in ways. And the work that we're learning together and the work that we're doing at Mass as well is building on amazing work and research that's done already or thus far by many other architects and designers and anthropologists or clinicians So this project has a really unique way, like our way in or opportunity to contribute and shed lights into how trauma-informed care can show up in affordable housing in all of these spaces. So that's one way to think about kind of how we can normalize it and come together around this concept.
Daphne, I'm curious, from where you sit in resident services, why do you think it's important to normalize trauma-informed care? How does it actually benefit where you sit?
I think that it will help change the stereotypes around what it means to live in affordable housing from the inside out. Boom, that's my answer.
That's the tweet. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Panel over.
No, seriously, like I was sitting here rethinking, like, what is it for me? Like, why? And that's my why. And I think that's very important. Yeah, it just goes back to just, as Krisha talked about the language, just simply, because that's the cool thing to do. Taking people and human life, humanity, and just into consideration, and community into consideration. If we're serving people holistically, I just think it's time to like really take another step deeper into doing that and learning and growing and stepping into the unknown, and bringing the people who are impacted by it the most into the process. So definitely changing the perception of what it means to live in affordable housing from the inside out.
I appreciate that. Krisha, what about you? Why is it important to normalize trauma resilient approaches?
So I would like to build off of what Daphne mentioned or stated. She used the word stereotype, and I totally agree. I think normalizing trauma resilient approaches, it helps to eliminate the shame, right, and the stigma, and it allows, I believe it allows residents to feel and know, both of them, they feel and they know that they are supported, right? We have to normalize it. They are not in this by themselves. Caitlin, you mentioned at the start of the webinar, the prevalence of trauma, right? And so if chances are, if we've encountered 5 people in 1 hour, chances are 1 or 2 of those 5 individuals have experienced something traumatic in their life, right? And so to take that experience and to normalize it, let them know that they are not in this boat alone. Again, it takes down break down those barriers, especially the stigma and then the shame. And I also wanted to restate actually, that why is it important to normalize this? It goes back to the point that I made earlier. We don't want this shift to be something that we do, right? We want this shift to be who we are, right? We're not a checklist. We're not something that it's not something that we do. We are naturally people who are compassionate and concerned and respectful and would like to see the greater good for the whole individual. That's who we are, not what we do. So that's why I think it's important to normalize it.
I love it. It's like a whole mindset shift. I mean, it's really changing and reorienting, or really getting back to what you said, Krisha, like getting back to your instincts in some way. Yeah. Juliana, anything else that you want to add to that?
Caitlin, I feel like I don't need to. We have this amazing panel, but since you asked, I will. And I just continue to be very grateful too for learning with this group of partners. I think something this project has taught me on a personal level is that you are always able to learn, and every person has a little bit of the truth, and we're all sort of on this journey of putting it together. And something that comes up so often in this group is that our communities are already resilient. We are not arriving to deliver resilience. It exists. People are resilient. They're showing us that every single day. Each person on this webinar is resilient. You made it through a very difficult year. You are resilient. And so, if that's the case, then why did we embark on this journey to really hone in on resilience, right? If we're already seeing it, why do we have to care about this? And I think this bigger question for us when we zoom out and look at the bigger picture is, what are the barriers that we're actually putting in the way of our staff being compassionate in their service delivery? Is it just the administrative burden overall? Is it particular policies they have to implement? Is it having to say no every single day? No this, no that. That makes it really difficult for staff, for residents. And so how do we design a compassionate housing system? And I think that this matters because this is our mission. POAH's mission is to increase the supply of affordable housing and to do it in a way that benefits the people who live there. We think this is a win-win, right? So if we can change some of these policies that make it hard for residents to succeed in our housing, we win too. It's not an either or. We think that this can generate, it can be good for residents, it can be good for staff who are really burnt out, especially after this year, and it can be good for our bottom line. But I think, one last point for us is we don't think we can get there alone, right? So we have this amazing opportunity through Enterprise and Wells Fargo. We think we can make a lot of progress. Stay tuned with us. We're going to be really on this journey for the next 2 years. We're going to learn a lot. We're going to have so many more examples to share, but we also want to team up with other organizations to think about what do we all need to advocate for together. And so we're working with an organization called Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future as a partner to engage other housing organizations in this work. We're not the only ones doing it. We weren't the first to arrive here. What can we learn from them? What can we learn together? And how do we look at the bigger policy and regulatory environment so that it supports that natural inclination towards compassionate service delivery rather than creates tension or friction or adversity in that? How does the bigger system support it? I think there are a lot of great models out there. The Enterprise Green Communities Checklist is a process we've learned from. Other ways we can incentivize owners to do this. Other ways we can look to shift policy that may not be working. So that's a part of this journey that we are really excited to work with other organizations. And part of the reason we're so grateful that so many folks opted into this webinar because, I have to admit, I think all the panelists were a little nervous when we found out how many people were coming. I think it also reaffirmed that there's so many folks who care about this. There are so many folks who really want to move the needle on this work, and we cannot do it alone. And it's going to take all of us. So I think we're just really grateful to be I'm really grateful to be with this amazing panel in this work, and really grateful to be with all the folks who are listening in, who I know are going to be a part of the change that we're trying to create as well.
Juliana, just thank you for also answering my next question, which I was so curious about the policy because, I'm sure there are a lot of people in housing who are on this call who are like, yeah, this is all great, but like, what about the policies? So just appreciate that this project also has an eye to thinking about not just how POAH as an organization can change, because obviously that's pretty big. You have such a large portfolio across the country, but also, asking how we actually can shift the policies, since that is such a big barrier that does keep people from being as compassionate as they could be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that part of the work is going to take a lot of creativity, which is another reason that's a value we want to lean into and take this equity lens, right? We've been doing this work for a long time in a particular way, and it's time to disrupt some of that thinking. So we have to be able to think really creatively about what actually isn't working, even though it's the way we've always done it. And we think that this process we're going through together will help pull a lot of that out, but we know there's always more to learn, which is why I'm excited that there's such a big community of folks who are interested in this work.
Same here. Well, I know we're pretty much getting up on time, so I'm just going to leave us with one last question, and we can just kind of rapid fire this. So something that I have learned in our work together is just the importance of self-care, and not just like the self-care, like, I don't know, listen to Sade while you you know, have a candle and some chocolate, which, listen, is part of self-care, don't get me wrong, but also like actually like winding down from your day and like metabolizing all of the stress and energy in a healthy way. So I'm just going to ask all of you, what is something that you're going to do today to take care of yourself? So Alejandra, what are you doing to take care of yourself today?
For today, I really wanted to go on a walk, but I'm hearing severe thunder outside. So I don't know how possible it's going to be. It's like pouring. I'm in Atlanta, so there's like a huge storm running through. So I think I'm going to opt for chocolate. I got some fudge on a road trip I just did. So I think I'm just going to cozy it up, get some fudge, just disconnect for the rest of the day and just wind down. That's one way.
All right, I'll see you there. Krisha, what about you?
Well, Alejandra, you're too far away for me to come and get some fudge, but I would, if you were not, I would be knocking on your door. But I'm going to choose to end my day laughing, right? So at the end of my day, I'm going to get a bowl of popcorn and I'm going to watch some old school sitcoms like Good Times and What's Happening. Those are the two that I'm on right now. So I'm going to end the day laughing and to release some of that stress. So.
That sounds great. Daphne, what about you?
Well, Caitlin, I think I am going to go home and light a candle and turn on some Sade. That's the perfect thing to do. So I think I'm changing my answer. I'm going to go home, light my candle, maybe clean up my parlor, turn on some Sade, and maybe sip a little wine. Can I say that? That's what I'm going to do.
Hey, that's a realness. If that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. Juliana, what about you?
Oof. Well, before I indulge in the fudge that I will drive to Atlanta to get from Alejandra, I am going to actually metabolize my energy. I'm going to exercise. I'm one of those people that turn their living room into a home gym. So I'm going to go home. I'm going to sweat it out and just appreciate this amazing group of practitioners.
That's great. I also am going to be embracing community. It is Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And here in Cincinnati, we have something called Asian Food Week, which is really just an excuse to go to all your favorite Asian restaurants. And yeah, so I'm just going to be like leaning into community and also eating a lot of noodles along the way. So I think that is actually our time. So thank you, panelists, so much for all of your amazing insight and your truth bombs and everything that you have shared. And I'm going to hand it over to Christy now.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thanks for a really interesting conversation that, at least for me personally, every time I talk with Juliana or others about this project, I learned something else, and today was no exception. So thank you so much for bringing all of your experiences and perspectives into this conversation about compassion. I think that's like the word of the webinar for me. So thank you. So we did have some questions that came in. So I'll just ask for like a quick hand up volunteer of who wants to address this first one. It would be great to have an example or examples of how to approach trauma-informed design that reflects the vulnerability of the clients. For example, those at the lowest end of the income spectrum versus those who have a more moderate, who are at a more moderate income level.
Maybe Alejandra and I can tag team that one. So I'll just mention toward the latter half, I think we believe that there will be a part of this that's universal. And so we intentionally have included in our project mixed income site with folks of all income levels, including market rate renters in a very expensive market here in Boston, and also communities that are predominantly folks with lower income. So we do think there's some universality to this. And in some of our early work redesigning a particular office and community space with one of our teams, I think part of what we started to hear is that some of what was challenging for residents was equally as challenging for staff when it comes to the built environment. And so I think, again, sort of like, I'm not sure that what we might discover I think it is pretty universal, and that we can design, we absolutely should understand our context and our end user, but that we're already starting to see a lot of what works for one person can usually work for others as well because of this sort of universality.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I will add for what Juliana was mentioning about this particular opportunity we had early in this project to see and assess like what are some things that could be done on a particular site, just to see what comes up differently. And like it's very important to understand that even though there's a universality to some of the things we can implement in different sites. So improving acoustics, or just adding more natural light, or things like improving ventilation. Some of the things we've been learning in the last year. It's also equally important for us to engage community and understand what makes most sense for that community, and have them co-define what are the desires, needs, and wants, or things that they want changed. In that way, we can start to understand what that vulnerability is for that community, and how can the built environment address that specifically. So one other example from this work is also from this particular project, Juliana, is that we also learned, for example, that from all of the residents that might be coming in to the office to visit POAH or to visit other services, they might be coming in with their children. And before they even sit down and talk with a POAH staff member or another staff member, they need to know that their children are okay, that they're safe, that they have a space for them, before they even start to pay attention to their paperwork. So unless that, for example, unless that vulnerability or that need is met first with the space, then they can start to shift gears and talk about what's in front of them. So I think that's one way to start to kind of pause and take a look at, okay, what are the things that are affecting this particular resident or this other, or even just myself as a staff member, that I need to address before I even pay attention to what I need to be doing with my day. So I don't know if that starts to get at that question, but I think that's some examples of how vulnerability can be addressed in our spaces.
Great, thank you. Another question, are there already some changes that you've started to implement since this specific project kicked off? Any examples of changes that are already in place?
I think one, I would reiterate that Daphne mentioned earlier. So in affordable housing, sometimes, well, any kind of housing, but common terminology in our housing is lease violation. So if you've done something that's non-compliant with your lease, we'll send you a lease violation. And like one super low hanging fruits, like Daphne said, don't send it on a Friday. Don't send it on the day that the person receiving it can't do anything to respond and just has to sit with that information over the weekend. So I think that's one super low hanging fruit, right? I think there are other areas where we're already starting to see a lot of tension that we know we want to look into. So we talked about like the lease renewal process, talked a lot about home inspections. So the high volume of traffic of folks that may or may not be known to you coming into your home to kind of poke around if you live in affordable housing and are subject to inspection. So how could we imagine that differently? How could we make that a more empowering experience? I think there are some things like that are natural and easy to change, and then others that are going to take a lot more time to really peel back the layers and see how we can make those changes. Daphne, what do you think? Are there other changes that we've started to see we should elevate? We can't hear you. All right, well, stay tuned for, I think, to our project as well through the HABC website, because we're excited to share as we learn. Oh, there you are, Daphne.
There I go.
Okay.
I don't know what was happening. I think you named it. That one was a big one. again, just like letting people sit with that over the weekend and they can't call anybody or do anything about it. I think that was one of the biggest ones right there. Just being more mindful in how we are communicating things that could be undesirable, the undesirable information, period, to our residents. We've been really taking that into consideration and changing our wording and just being more mindful and intentional about coming at it from a place of compassion.
I do think that Krisha gave also a really great example with the resident council. It doesn't have to be a resident council, but I think just being clear about if I have a problem and I feel like I don't want to necessarily escalate it all the way to property management or get management involved, or like I don't want to get law enforcement involved, like I just want to keep it essentially within my peers. Like I think that having some mechanisms in place can always be helpful. And I think when you also know that person, like when you see that person in the hallways or you see them on the property, and that you can talk to that person and they can escalate it to some kind of mechanism so your voice is heard and that your situation is heard. I think even that is kind of an easy example of how you can build in transparency and clear communication, which is always trauma informed.
Great. So last question. So how can we work with the funding community to prioritize trauma-informed design and support this type of work?
Yes. So that's the first answer is yes. I think that that's something we are really interested in exploring more deeply, and also would invite members of the funding community to help us think about that. Is it thinking about creating incentives? Is it, in just increasing visibility? I think there's a lot of interest in this type of work, but maybe not enough plug and play for owners who want to adopt it. And that's part of the reason we plan to make all of our learning open and available. We want to have a wide open playbook for others. But I think an important part of this project is how do we make this a part of how we fund and how we award projects, how we incentivize projects, and instead of what I think is happening now, which is in affordable housing, really asking owners to go out and take this on themselves and find the resources to do it. So I think that, Enterprise and Wells Fargo have taken a really big first step in recognizing this work as a breakthrough innovation. And we'd love to continue to dialogue with the funding community and different funding stakeholders about what that would look like in a way that is mutually beneficial and good for community.
Great. Well, thank you all. Once again, thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much to our webinar participants. Your commitment to this work is truly inspiring. And once again, I want to really encourage everyone to stay informed about POAH and this project, as well as our other challenge winners, as they execute on their housing affordability solutions by subscribing for updates at housingbreakthrough.org. Thank you all. Stay safe, be well, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.